like you can focus in on those things to perfection. What arranges the light to set? John, you started school here in 1919 when you were about 10 years old, and during the time you were at the primary school something very special happened in Rotorua, and I wonder if you'd tell me in your own words what it was and how you as kids at school reacted.
Well, it's I think it was the first plane that came to Rotorua in 1922, and we were all in class. I think I must have been one of the early classes in 1922, and we heard this noise going over, and of course we realised it was a plane, but none of us had ever seen a plane before. So the kids all started to dive out through the door, and they wanted to have a look at it. See, and the teachers tried to stop them getting out of the door, so they started climbing out of the window. And I remember we were all tearing down from the school down Arawa Street. And I think I got as far as the old post office there, and I thought, oh, blow, the plane was away and probably landed by the time we got there. So I went back to school with some of the others, but some of the kids still went right out to Arawa Park, where it landed. But that's about all I know about it.
And what did some of the kids tell you about it? Did they know who flew it in? Did they know anything about the airplane?
No, I never heard anything about it at all. I suppose we weren't sort of interested enough to get data about a thing like that now. But I think it's all been recorded since, who it was and
now, what about tell me about the aerodrome, for instance, when that started. Tell me about little aeroplane that you knew about, or tell me about some of the people involved in aircraft.
Well, I think the first aerodrome was out in Fenton Park. And what was the man that used to run that? I've forgotten his name now. I think there's a subdivision out at...
Blackmore.
Yeah. Well, he had a plane and he used to take up trips, pleasure flights and that sort of thing. But I was always scared of getting my feet off the ground, and I never went up in it. Not until a long time afterwards. I went up in one.
Now, John, there was an air pageant held in 1930, and there was one particular little aircraft that arrived on that day, and it came from, I think, Te Teko. Can you tell me anything about that little aeroplane?
Oh yes, that came out, and we went out and had a look at it landing. It was a very small plane. I think it was a homemade one. And a chap gave, when it was going, when he was ready to leave, he stood up in the plane and he gave a little talk about it and all that sort of thing. But I think he put too much petrol in it. I think he put too much weight on the poor little thing. And when he took off, he couldn't seem to get any altitude. And he came down, I think he came down in a field away out Napuna way somewhere, or Tinai way. And he'd have been lucky, he would have landed, but he hit the scrub line, and the thing all folded up and packed up. But I don't think he was hurt at all. So that's about all I know about that one.
And now you mentioned Stan Blackmore. Tell me about Stan Blackmore.
Well, I don't really know much about him at all, Don. You know him by name, you know, and what he does and that sort of thing, but I don't really know anything more about him.
Well, something else you will remember, I'm sure, is the first visit of Kingsford Smith, or the first time he brought his big aircraft, the Southern Cross, into Rotorua. Tell me something about that, how it happened, where it happened, and what the reaction was like.
Well, I think we all knew beforehand that it was coming, because I remember taking the camera and getting away out there to Smith's farm. I think it was Smith's farm. And we waited, there was a big crowd out there. And we all waited around. They kept us off the field, but we all waited around for this thing to come in, and sure enough, over it came. Of course, to us that was an immense plane in those days. They called it the old bus. And that landed in the paddock, and of course as soon as it hit the ground, everybody tore over and went all around it and looked at it and that sort of thing. And Smithy came out and gave us a little bit of a talk. I forget what he said now, but I was too busy trying to get photographs of it, you know, and that sort of thing. And it created a terrific lot of interest, that thing. It must have been a wonderful old plane. I don't know, to me it looked as though it had been homemade too.
How long was he out there, John?
Oh, don't think he stayed here very long, but he did take flights up, what they call barnstorming. He did take flights up around town, but again, I never went. I probably couldn't afford 30 shillings in those days anyway.
Now, you had a friend, Rex Norman, who was involved with that aircraft too. I think wasn't he with the petrol company and supplying the petrol for that aircraft?
Well, that's possible, yes. He worked for, yeah, that's right, he worked for the mobile petrol company. And he'd probably be going out to refuel it and that sort of thing. But I don't know much about that one either.
Do you remember anything about the Aero Club at all?
No.
Didn't involve you at all?
I think the only person I knew that seemed quite good at the time was, I think, a Miss Urquhart. I think she took lessons in flying there, and I think she got a pilot's licence.
Mm. So there's not much else about aircraft that you remember particularly,
Not a
John?
great deal, no.
You don't remember? I'm sorry, yeah. Okay, no.
But,
Okay. Well now, John, in those days, aircraft was something that you didn't normally see. What was the attitude of people towards aircraft and people who flew aircraft? Was it an exciting event?
well, for people that were interested in it, I think it was very exciting. Now, a friend of mine worked in the Ford garage, Frank Stewart, and he was mad on planes. I remember one came over once when we were in a workshop up in Titanic High Street. And a plane came up and flew around, one of those little planes. And Scotty was so excited he even climbed up on the roof of the workshop to get a closer look at it. Now, when he went and lived in Wakatani, he got very interested in planes and things down there too. And I think he had something to do with making that one that we were just talking about that crash landed out at Tinai. But he was very, very excited about it. Other people probably didn't think very much of them, well, I don't know anyway, but I'm more interested in motor cars than aeroplanes.
But it must have been a very exciting event when the first aircraft arrived in Rotorua.
Oh, yes. It was quite exciting, yes. Yeah, that's the only way I can express it, was curiosity and really you want to get out and have a look at the thing, you know, because it was quite fantastic.
And as aircraft became commonplace here, did the interest was it still maintained, the interest in aircraft, our aerodrome and our aero club and those sorts of things?
Oh, I think so. Yes, there was people that followed it up, and you know, being something relatively new, of course, it created great interest. It's hard to believe the difference between people's interest in it then and what it is now, where you get 3 or 4 planes landing up in the aerodrome and flying over the reef several times a day, where you think nothing of it. There's a big contrast.
And when did you first fly in an aircraft?
My first flight was when Ozzie James was out at the Fenton Street, at the Fenton Park. And I was out there with my sister, and we were looking at an old plane there, just a curiosity. And he said, would you like to go up in it? And I'd never been up in one before. And so we got in this little old thing, and he took us away up and flew all around town, and it was great looking down, you know, on places and that sort of thing. And although I was still hanging onto the seat with a tight grip even after he'd landed, you know, but otherwise that was my first flight, and I thought it was quite good. But I didn't become a real enthusiast with it.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't fly again until we went down in 1937, I think. A fire brigade team went down to Nelson for a fire brigade demo, and some of the chaps, Fred Briggs and some of those fellas, they used to get seasick, and the boat that used to go over there was pretty notorious for rolling over and that sort of thing. So we decided we'd fly. So we went in one of those in the old Dominic. I think that held about 8 passengers. So we flew over in that and flew back on it. And that was quite good. We got over there so quickly, and that was quite exciting. That was about the second time I'd been up in a plane.
And John, do you ever remember a visit, for instance, of Jean Batten in Rotorua? She returned here several times. Does that mean anything to you?
I I didn't know that she'd come back, and I don't ever remember seeing her at all.
Well, now tell me, again, you started school here in 1910.
1919.
1919, and you were
Oh,
10.
wait a minute. No, we came here in 1919, but my father stayed out at Kaharoa. We had a block out there. And we lived with him for the remainder of 1919 and all of 1920. So 1921 would be when I started school here.
I see. And tell me something about the primary school in 1920 when you began.
Oh, it was, I think it was a lot smaller than what it is now, but I don't know.
You enjoyed your school days?
Oh yes, yes, certainly, yes. The classes were different in those days, I think, in that you hear of kids giving the teachers cheek and all that sort of thing these days. But if we opened our mouth in class, we got the cane. That was all there was to it. And if you did anything really bad, you were sent round to the headmaster's office, and he'd give you about 6 cuts, 3 on each hand. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't be tolerated today.
And who was the headmaster?
A chap named Lewins.
Lewis.
That was the headmaster, but I think he was a bit of a bad-tempered fellow too. And he just loved laying into you. And you didn't have to do much untoward to get those cuts. Just turning and whispering to somebody in class, you'd get the cane for that. You know, it was a lot tougher. The discipline was much greater in those days.
And what did you do for sport when you were at school?
Well, not very much, because when we came here we were pretty poor and we had to go to work. And I used to go at 7 o'clock every morning down to Coleman's shop, and I had to clean the windows and sweep floors up and then go to school. And when I got out of school, I went straight down Arrow Street back to the shop, and I didn't get home till 5:30. I spent nearly all my early days like that. So I never got a chance to play football and things like that. But when I got older, of course, I got very interested in tramping and things like that. So I remember going up to Ruapehu one weekend, and we climbed Ruapehu one day, and we had a bit of a rest the next day, and we climbed the top of Narahoe the following day. We nearly lost our lives on Narahoe because Rex Norman was behind me and I was up above him, and we slipped on the ice. It was just hard ice. And it was only the fact I had a ski stick, and I dug the point of it into the ice, but I was hanging on to it. And I was able to get around and dig a hole with my left foot, dig a bit of a hole in the ice. And that was, we took a bit, that was a bit of a shock, and it took a bit of a time to get over it.
Now tell me, John, what other schools were there in Rotorua when you started at the primary?
There would only be, I think it was only the Catholic school and the Waka school. That was out where the golf course is now. That were the only other schools I know of.
And who was your teacher, apart from the head teacher?
Oh, I forget now. There was a Miss Glasgow, and there was a Mr. Hart. And I can't remember the other, because the different classrooms, you went from one, each year you went from one classroom to the other. You just didn't go automatically. You had to pass in your standard before you moved to the next one. If you didn't pass, you stayed in that one the following year too. And then, of course, we didn't have a high school in those days. So when we got to high school status, we had to go different places around town and finish our schooling in that. I remember going to part of the old St. John's Hall, and they had school there once. Then they got a room up at the hospital. There was a spare room up there, and we had high school up there. So we shifted around a wee bit. And so the boys' high school as we know it now, that wasn't built then. The only time I ever went there was when I was an apprentice in screwing pipe, when we wired it up. Fred Briggs wired it up. That's the only time I went to high school here.
And when did you leave school, John?
When did I leave? Must have been about 1924. Somewhere around about then. Yes, it would have been, because I put in a year behind the counter at Coleman's. And then I think towards the end of 25 was when I got a job with Fred Briggs as an apprentice. And that was the happiest day in my life, when I got out of that shop. Even crawling around the dusty, dirty old roof out at Walker and went out there on push bikes. It was a heaven at the head of the shop.
And John, when did you join the fire brigade as a volunteer?
Well, just after I went to Fred Briggs, because he was in the fire brigade. I think he thought he might brighten me up a bit if he got me into the fire brigade. So it'd be about 1925.
Now that was in Hope Upper Street. Tell me what the fire brigade consisted of when you went there in 1925.
In 1925, there was an old engine called the Napier. That was an old Napier fire engine that had been built into a fire engine. Prior to that, it had a deck on it with seats, and it used to run between here and Taupo with the tourists. The only other appliance there was a hose carrier. It was like a great big drum of hose with big wheels, and you had to tow it. But they used that before I actually joined the brigade. I believe in the old days, probably during the First World War or something like that. They used to, if they got the chance, they'd get a taxi and to tow it out to the fire. But by the time I joined, the Napier was in the shed, and the day I took my gear down to the station, the Dennis had just arrived, mostly in pieces, and had to be built up. So I really arrived on that station the same day as the old Dennis fire engine. Of course, that was a much more modern thing. It had a pump on it and everything. That old machine could pump water for hours and hours without even heating up. I think they had a scrub fire in the government garden at one time. It was going for 5 hours. A wonderful old machine.
And how many were involved in the fire brigade at that time?
There'd be about 20 odd, I suppose. Yeah, of course, all volunteers. There was only one man who was a sort of a driver janitor, and he was the only permanent man. Then they had the fire board to control it. But all the rest of us were volunteers. And because being volunteers, we were working in the daytime, but if they had a fire bell in those days, if the old bell went, we'd have to leave work and dive after the fire, which it was okay with me because Fred Briggs was in the fire brigade, so we both went, you see. And at night time we slept on the station and manned the machine, and we were more or less what they called the night squad. And then in the morning we got up and went home and had our breakfast and went to work just like anybody else. I was on that, apart from the war years, lived on that station until 1948. That's when I got married. And then we used to just go down to the drills. When they shifted to the new station in Howe Street, we went down there and helped to drill the other volunteers, the remainder of the volunteers. But of course there were more permanents in those days, and the permanents gradually, more or less, took over the whole thing. So I didn't leave until, I didn't retire from the brigade until 1969. I did 43 years altogether.
John, you must look back on a long sort of a career in Rotorua that few other people have had, really.
Oh yes. My first impressions of Rotorua was when I was 4 years old.
4.
We were in Te Puke at the time, but we came up on a holiday. And I remember as plain as anything being out at Te Wairua, and the old Terraces Hotel was still standing, or at the front of it. And I've got a photo in there somewhere of it, it's still standing. And the other one was when I went out, must have been went out to Walker, saw the kids diving off the bridge for pennies, mate.